Captain Kim felt his heart beating faster as he watched the alien space station get bigger on the screen in front of him. The massive structure looked like nothing humans had ever built before. It was made of some kind of shining metal that seemed to change colors as their ship got closer. Strange lights blinked in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "Sir, we're getting their docking instructions now," said Lieutenant Zhang from the communications desk. Her voice was steady, but Kim could hear the nervousness underneath. This was the moment everyone on Earth had been waiting for and dreading at the same time. Kim straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. 3 years since the deep space telescopes had picked up the first alien signals. 3 years since humanity realized they weren't alone in the universe. And now here they were, about to shake hands with beings from another world. "How's our diplomatic team doing?" Kim asked, turning to look at the lift doors behind him. "Ambassador Park is going over his notes one more time," replied Commander O. Kim's second in command. "He's been practicing the greeting protocol since we left Earth space. I think he could do them in his sleep by now." The lift doors opened with a soft hiss, and Ambassador Park stepped onto the bridge. He was wearing the formal diplomatic robes that had been specially designed for this meeting. Dark blue with silver trim, representing Earth's oceans and moon. Simple but dignified. Park was in his 50s, with grey starting to show in his black hair. He had spent most of his career dealing with difficult negotiations between Earth's various nations. Now he was about to negotiate with aliens, Captain, Park said with a small bow. "How are we looking?" "Right on schedule, Ambassador. The Zephyrians have cleared us for docking at their station. We should be connecting to their airlock in about 20 minutes. Park walked over to the main view screen and stared at the alien station. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, "and terrifying." Kim nodded. The station was huge, probably 10 times bigger than the largest human space station. It had dozens of arms stretching out in all directions, each one ending in docking bays that could fit ships much larger than the Harmony. Strange symbols were carved into the hull, glowing with soft light. "Sir," called out Ensign Min from the sensor station, "I'm reading at least 30 different ship types docked at that station. Some of them are massive, way bigger than anything we've ever built." "Good thing we're here to talk, not fight," Park said with a nervous laugh. The next 20 minutes passed slowly. Kim watched his crew work at their stations, everyone trying to look calm and professional. But he could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they kept glancing at the view screen. This was history in the making, and they all knew it. "Docking clamps engaged," reported Lieutenant Seo from the helm. "We have a solid connection." "Atmosphere. Trails equalizing," added Dr. Yoon from the science station. "Their air mixture is actually pretty close to ours. We can breathe it without suits, though I'd recommend keeping the breathing masks handy just in case." Ambassador Park gathered his small team around him. There was Dr. Cho, the linguist who had spent months learning what little they knew of the Zephyrian language. Captain Lee, a military advisor who was there just in case things went wrong, and Secretary Kang, who would be recording everything for the history books. "Remember," Park said to his team, "we represent all of humanity today. Every person on Earth, every colonist on Mars and the outer worlds. They're all counting on us to make a good first impression. What if they don't want to be friends?" asked Secretary Kang quietly. Park was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But let's assume the best. They agreed to this meeting. That has to mean something." The airlock door opened with a sound like wind chimes. The corridor beyond was filled with soft blue light. The walls seemed to be made of the same color-changing metal as the station's exterior. Strange music, if it could be called music, drifted through the air. It sounded like crystals singing. "Well," said Ambassador Park, taking his first step, into the alien corridor. "Here we go." As they walked deeper into the station, Kim couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The corridors were too empty. Where were all the aliens? And why did the music sound so sad? They were about to find out just how wrong things could go. Admiral Choi sat in her command chair, staring at the replay footage for the 5th time. The idea destruction of the Harmony played out in horrible detail on the massive screen that dominated the Earth Defense Command Center. 847 people, gone in seconds, vaporized by alien weapons, while trying to make peace. The command center was dead quiet. 50 officers and analysts watched the footage with her, but nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the soft hum of computers and the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment. Choi had been in the military for 32 years. She had seen combat during the Mars colony uprising. She had commanded ships during the asteroid mining wars. She had watched good people die before. But this was different. This was murder. Cold, calculated murder designed to send a message. "Ma'am," said Colonel Park, her chief of staff. His voice was barely above a whisper. "What are your orders?" Choi closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The sadness was still there, but now it was mixed with something much more dangerous. Anger, pure, focused anger. "Activate Protocol Omega," she said quietly. The words hit the command center like a lightning bolt. Protocol Omega was the plan nobody wanted to use. The plan they had all hoped would stay locked away in classified files forever. It was humanity's response to an existential threat. Total war. Within minutes, encrypted signals were racing across space at faster-than-light speeds. Every human colony, every military base, every ship in the fleet received the same message. 3 simple words that changed everything. Protocol Omega active. On the industrial world of New Seoul, factory manager Kim Jung looked at the message on his screen and immediately began converting his manufacturing plants. Instead of making farming equipment and mining tools, his factories would now produce weapons and armor. His workers didn't question the change. They had all seen the footage of the Harmony's destruction. In the asteroid belt, Captain Yoon was 3 days into a routine cargo run when the message came through. He was hauling processed metals from the mining stations back to Earth. Without hesitation, he changed course and headed for the nearest military depot. His cargo ship would be retrofitted with weapons and shields. The metals in his hold would become ammunition. Commander Han was patrolling the outer colonies when she got the word. She immediately recalled all her ships from their scattered positions. Her small patrol fleet would join the larger force that was already beginning to gather. Every ship would be needed for what was coming. At the Mars Technical Institute, Dr. Bay had been working on theoretical weapons for years. Projects that existed only on paper, because nobody wanted to build such destructive devices. Now suddenly, she had unlimited funding and all the resources she needed. Her theoretical weapons would become very real, very quickly. The response was incredible. Within hours, humanity was mobilizing on a scale never seen before. It wasn't just the military. Civilian ships were being converted to warships. Mining equipment was being turned into weapons. Scientists were sharing research that had been classified for decades. President Moon's holographic image appeared on screens across human space. Every colony, every ship, every outpost received his message simultaneously. His face was grim but determined. "My fellow humans," he began, "today we learned that there are those in this galaxy who see us as nothing more than insects to be crushed. They killed our people not in battle, but in cold blood. They destroyed the Harmony to teach us fear. They wanted to show us our place in their galaxy." The president paused, letting his words sink in. "They have made a terrible mistake. Humanity has never bowed to bullies. We have never accepted defeat, and we will not start now. They killed our people to teach us fear. Today they learn what humanity does with fear. We turn it into fuel." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships that had been scattered across 100 systems began converging on rally points. Military vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners, mining barges, research ships, and even luxury yachts. If it could fly in space, it was being pressed into service. Admiral Choi watched the tactical displays as the fleet assembled. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Over 10,000 vessels of every type and size. Some were sleek, military ships designed for combat. Others were hastily converted civilian craft with weapons bolted to their hulls, all of them crewed by humans who had one thing in common. They were angry. "Admiral," said her intelligence officer, Commander Lee, "we're getting reports from across Cypherian space. They seem completely surprised by our response. Their communications suggest they expected us to surrender after the Harmony incident. Choi almost smiled. Almost. They don't understand us at all, do they? She said, studying the map of Zephyrian territory. They think they killed diplomats. They just declared war on a species that conquered its own death world. Captain Song held his breath as the ghost of Busan drifted through the darkness of space. His ship was completely silent, running on minimal power to avoid detection. The Zephyrian outpost at Sigma 7 hung in the distance like a glowing jewel, its alien architecture beautiful and deadly at the same time. "How close can we get?" Song whispered to his helmsman, Petty Officer Lim. "Another 2 kilometers, sir." "After that, their sensors might pick us up even with our stealth systems." Song nodded. The Ghost of Busan was one of humanity's newest stealth frigates, designed specifically for missions like this: small, fast, and nearly invisible to most sensor systems. His crew of 12 had trained for months to work in perfect silence, communicating through hand signals and whispered words. Lieutenant Kim hunched over her sensor console, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Thermal signature." "Masked," she reported quietly. "Power output at minimum levels. They still don't know we're here." The Zephyrian outpost was a supply station, one of dozens scattered throughout their territory. It stored fuel, ammunition, and spare parts for their patrol fleets. More importantly, it housed a communication relay that coordinated Zephyrian military movements across 3 star systems. "Sergeant Park," Song called softly to his Marine commander, "are your people ready?" Park checked his equipment one more time. His squad of 8 Marines was armed with the latest human weapons, designed to work in the vacuum of space. They had practiced this exact mission 100 times in simulation. "Ready, sir. We go in fast, plant the charges, and get out. 15 minutes maximum." Song watched the outpost through his periscope. Zephyrian ships came and went regularly, following predictable patterns. The aliens seemed to follow rigid schedules, never varying their routines. It was a weakness humans had learned to exploit. "Contact in 60 seconds, reported Ensign Choi from the navigation station. The next few minutes passed in tense silence. The Ghost of Busan crept closer to the outpost, using the shadow of a nearby asteroid to mask its approach. When they were close enough, Sergeant Park and his Marines launched themselves through space using personal maneuvering units. Song watched them disappear into the darkness, then turned his attention back to the outpost. "Any sign we've been detected?" "Negative, sir. Their patrol ships are following normal patterns, no change in communication traffic." 15 minutes later, the Marines returned. As soon as they were aboard, Song ordered the retreat. The Ghost of Busan slipped away into the darkness, leaving no trace of its presence. 6 hours later, the Zephyrian outpost at Sigma 7 exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The aliens never knew what hit them. This was happening all across Zephyrian space. Human forces had completely abandoned the traditional rules of warfare that the aliens expected. Instead of massive fleet battles in open space, humans struck like shadows. Supply convoys disappeared without a trace. Communication stations went offline without warning. Patrol ships simply vanished. The Zephyrians were confused and increasingly desperate. They had fought wars for thousands of years, but always according to their ancient codes of honor. Fleets met in formal battle, commanders exchanged challenges, and victories were won through superior firepower and tactics. Humans didn't follow any of those rules. At the captured Zephyrian facility on Proxima Delta, Commander Na sat across from her prisoner. The alien was tall and thin, with skin that looked like living crystal. Its body flickered with colored lights that seemed to indicate its emotional state. Right now, those lights were dim and confused. "I don't understand your species," the prisoner said through the translation device. "Your ship was badly damaged. Half your systems were offline. You should have surrendered when we disabled your main engines." Na leaned back in her chair and smiled. "That's your first mistake. Humans don't surrender, ever." The alien's lights flickered faster. "But your ship couldn't possibly function with that much damage. Our engineers examined the wreckage. Your life support was failing. Your weapons were operating at 30% capacity, and your hull had 17 major breaches. And yet here we are," Na said calmly. Your facility is ours, your ships are destroyed, and you're my prisoner. How is that possible? Na stood up and walked to the window. Outside, human technicians were busy studying captured Zephyrian equipment. They worked with the same determination that had allowed their species to survive on Earth for millions of years. You want to know how we kept fighting with a damaged ship? Duct tape and determination. Our engineer literally held our main power conduit together with his bare hands for 3 hours while we completed our mission. Our pilot flew the ship using manual controls because our computer systems were fried. Our weapons officer fired our guns by manually calculating trajectories in his head. The prisoner's glow dimmed even further. That's impossible. No species fights that way. You clearly don't understand humans. We fix things with tape and determination, and we never surrender, ever. Na turned back to face the alien. We're the species that survived ice ages, asteroid impacts and global wars. We're the species that figured out how to fly to other planets using controlled explosions. We're the species that turned a ball of rock into a garden world through pure stubbornness. What are you? The prisoner whispered. Na's smile disappeared, replaced by something much colder. We're the species you should have left alone. Across Zephyrian space, the message was becoming clear. Humanity wasn't following the rules of civilized warfare. They were fighting like the survivors they had always been, using every trick, every advantage, every desperate measure they could think of. The Zephyrians had started this war by destroying a diplomatic ship. Now they were learning what happened when you picked a fight with a species that had spent its entire existence fighting for survival. The hunt had begun, and humans were very good at hunting. The news from New Jeju arrived at Earth Defense Command at 0347 hours. Admiral Choi was asleep in her quarters when the emergency alert woke her up. She threw on her uniform and rushed to the command center, where her staff was gathered around the main display screen. The images were horrific. New Jeju had been a peaceful farming colony, home to 30,000 people who had never harmed anyone. Families, children, elderly grandparents who had moved there to enjoy the colony's beautiful landscapes and clean air. The Zephyrians had targeted the main settlement with orbital bombardment, turning the entire city into a crater of molten glass. How many survivors? Choi asked quietly. None, ma'am, replied Colonel Park, his voice shaking. The entire population is gone. They didn't even try to target military installations. This was pure murder. Choi stared at the screen showing the smoking ruins of what had once been a thriving human community. Children's playgrounds, schools, hospitals, homes where families had planned their futures, all of it reduced to ash and radioactive dust. The Zephyrians had made a calculation. Unable to catch the human raiders who were striking their military targets, they had decided to attack soft civilian targets instead. They thought this would force humanity to negotiate. They thought fear would make humans back down. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Send a message to all fleet commanders, Choi said, her voice as cold as space itself. Emergency meeting in 1 hour, and activate every reserve unit we have, every ship, every weapon, every soldier. Within the hour, holographic images of human commanders appeared around the conference table. Captains, admirals, and generals from across human space, their faces grim as they received the news from New Jeju. Admiral Choi stood before the assembled fleet commanders, her weathered face showing the weight of command. Behind her, the tactical display showed Zephyrian territory, marked in red. 17 star systems, hundreds of planets, thousands of military installations. They want to see what total war looks like, she said, her eyes reflecting cold fury. Grant their wish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Human fleets that had been spread across the galaxy began converging on Zephyrian space. But this wasn't the careful surgical strikes they had been conducting before. This was something else entirely. Captain Jiang commanded a battle group of 50 ships, including converted cargo vessels bristling with hastily mounted weapons. His target was the industrial complex at Vega Prime, the manufacturing heart of the Zephyrian military machine. All ships, this is Jiang, he broadcast as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Remember New Jeju, no mercy. The battle was savage and one-sided. Human ships swarmed the Zephyrian defenders like angry hornets. Cargo vessels that should have been carrying grain and manufactured goods instead unleashed torrents of missiles and energy beams. Mining ships designed to break apart asteroids turned their drilling lasers on enemy warships. Commander Arn's forces hit the defensive grid, protecting the Zephyrian core worlds. Her job was to systematically dismantle the network of space stations and weapon platforms that had protected Zephyrian civilization for centuries. "Target the power generators first," she ordered her squadron leaders. "Then the communication arrays. I want their entire defense network blind and helpless." Her ships moved with precision, destroying each defensive installation with overwhelming firepower. The Zephyrians had built their defenses to withstand traditional fleet attacks, but they had never imagined facing an enemy that fought with such ruthless efficiency. But the most terrifying sight was Dr. Bay's new weapons in action. The theoretical energy disruptors that had existed only on paper just weeks before were now mounted on human warships. When they fired, Zephyrian dreadnoughts simply ceased to exist, their matter scattered across space as expanding clouds of... As the aliens watched in horror, as ships that had taken decades to build were destroyed in seconds by weapons that shouldn't have been possible to create. The Zephyrian fleet commander stood before the High Council, his crystalline form flickering with exhaustion and fear. The massive chamber that had once echoed with confident proclamations of victory was now filled with panicked voices and desperate plans. "Report," commanded the High Counselor, though his own glow was dim with worry. "The humans have attacked 17 of our systems simultaneously," the fleet commander said. "They're not following any recognizable battle doctrine. Military ships fight alongside converted civilian vessels. They use weapons we've never seen before. They target our infrastructure, our supply lines, our communication networks. Surely our superior technology means nothing," the fleet commander interrupted, something unthinkable just days before. "They don't fight our ships one-on-one. They swarm us with dozens of vessels at once. Half their fleet shouldn't even be space-worthy, but somehow they keep fighting even when severely damaged." Another counselor leaned forward. "What do they want? Territory, resources, tribute?" The fleet commander's glow dimmed to almost nothing. "Sir, they're not fighting for territory or resources. They're fighting for revenge. They remember every single person who died on that diplomatic ship. They remember every civilian killed on New Jeju, and they're making us pay for all of it." Outside the council chamber, reports continued to pour in. Human fleets were appearing everywhere at once, striking targets across Zephyrian space with coordinated precision. Factory worlds went offline. Military academies were reduced to rubble. Even civilian shipping lanes were being disrupted by human raiders who seemed to appear out of nowhere. The Zephyrians had started this war by trying to teach humanity a lesson about power and fear. Now they were learning that some lessons come with a price too terrible to pay. Humanity had awakened and they were very, very angry. The end came faster than anyone expected. 3 months after the destruction of New Jeju, Zephyrian civilization simply stopped working. Their government couldn't communicate with distant colonies because human raiders had destroyed the communication networks. Their military couldn't coordinate because their command structures had been systematically eliminated. Their economy collapsed because human forces had targeted every major industrial center. It wasn't a surrender in the traditional sense. There was no final battle, no dramatic last stand. The Zephyrian leadership just ran out of options. Their fleets were scattered or destroyed. Their planets were cut off from each other. Their people were hungry and afraid. The message came through, on all frequencies, transmitted from what remained of the Zephyrian capital. It was brief and desperate. "We surrender unconditionally. Please stop the attacks. We surrender." Admiral Choi received the transmission aboard her flagship, the newly commissioned battleship Harmony's Revenge. The name had been chosen by the crew themselves, and it carried the meaning they intended. This war had started with the murder of innocent diplomats. Now it was ending with the complete defeat of those who had ordered that murder. She stood on the observation deck, looking down at the former Zephyrian capital world through the reinforced windows. The planet below had once been beautiful, its crystalline cities glowing with soft light that could be seen from orbit. Now those cities were dark. The power grids had been destroyed. The gleaming spires were cracked and broken. "Admiral," Colonel Park reported, appearing beside her with a data pad in his hands. "The war crimes tribunals have concluded. Supreme Overlord Vextar and his council have been executed for the massacre of the Harmony's crew and the civilians." On New Jeju, Choi nodded without taking her eyes off the planet below. Justice for Captain Kim, Ambassador Park, and the 847 souls aboard the Harmony was only the beginning. The tribunals had been thorough and fair, following Earth's laws about war crimes. The evidence had been overwhelming. The Zephyrians had deliberately targeted civilians and murdered diplomats under a flag of truce. "What about the rest of their leadership?" she asked. "Most fled to the outer colonies when they realized the war was lost. We're tracking them down one by one. The ones who stayed behind are cooperating fully with our occupation forces." Choi finally turned away from the window. "And the civilian population? Scared but not hostile. Most of them seem relieved that the fighting is over. They're getting food and medical supplies from our humanitarian units. Some are even volunteering to help with reconstruction efforts." This was important to Choi. Humanity had learned the hard lessons of war over the centuries. They knew the difference between soldiers who chose to fight and civilians who were just trying to survive. The Zephyrian people would be treated fairly, even if their leaders had been monsters. Across former Zephyrian space, human administrators were working around the clock to establish new governments. The transition was surprisingly smooth. Most Zephyrian colonies had been abandoned by their leadership and were grateful when human relief ships arrived with food, medicine, and engineers to repair damaged infrastructure. On the industrial world of Vega Prime, Commander Yoon was overseeing the rebuilding of the factories that his forces had destroyed months earlier. But now they would produce goods for human colonies instead of weapons for the Zephyrian military. "The local workers are actually pretty skilled," he reported to Earth Command. "Once they understood we weren't going to execute them or enslave them, they started cooperating. Production should be back to normal levels within 6 months. Similar reports came in from across the former Zephyrian territory. Humans were good at building things, and they were even better at fixing things that were broken. The war had destroyed much, but peace was creating opportunities to build something better." Captain Lee stood in the command center of the new Earth Defense Grid, a network of space stations and weapon platforms that now protected humanity's homeworld. He had been promoted 3 times during the war, rising from lieutenant to captain based on his performance in combat. "Ma'am," he reported to Admiral Choi via holographic communication, "long-range sensors are detecting another alien civilization approaching our borders. Long-range scans suggest they have a fleet of about 200 ships." Choi felt a familiar tension in her stomach. Were they about to face another war? "What are their intentions?" she asked. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies, requesting peaceful contact. They're calling themselves the Altarian Republic, and they say they want to establish diplomatic relations with humanity." Choi allowed herself a small smile. "Send them our standard response. Humanity welcomes peaceful neighbors and looks forward to mutually beneficial relationships." Lee nodded, but then hesitated. "Ma'am, should I also include the usual warning?" "Absolutely. Make sure they understand that while we welcome peaceful neighbors, we also remember our enemies. Include footage of what happened to the Zephyrian fleet. Let them see what happens to civilizations that mistake our desire for peace as a sign of weakness." The message that went out to the Altarian Republic was polite but clear. Humanity was willing to be friends, but they were also capable of being the most dangerous enemy anyone could imagine. The choice was up to the aliens. Within days, the Altarian response came back. It was respectful, almost humble. They had clearly studied what had happened to the Zephyrians, and they had no desire to repeat that mistake. As news of the successful first contact spread across human space, people began to understand what had really changed. The war with the Zephyrians hadn't just been about revenge or justice. It had been about humanity's place in the galaxy. For the first time since leaving Earth, humans weren't the newcomers, the primitives, the species that had to prove themselves worthy of respect. They were the ones other civilizations approached. Carefully, with respect and caution, the message that went out across the galaxy was simple but unmistakable. Earth's children had learned their place in the cosmos. At the top,